Well, hey there. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Glad to have you here. It's Simeon with you. And I wanted to continue with the part 2 from the video I made a few months ago about Bigfoot, cryptid, shapeshifting, and the connection to dark matter pockets. And I would encourage you to watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. In that video, I looked at some of the newer ideas about dark matter and the idea that dark matter can form threads, it can have a fractal shape. And we looked at some of the research of Kenneth R. Shoulders, who looked at micro ball lightning, exotic vacuum objects, and he specifically said that there was this dark state of ball lightning, which he connected even possibly to dark matter type of life forms, the connection between dark ball lightning and dark matter, and suggesting that possibly there are organisms that we wouldn't see, that would be invisible to us a lot of the time, that are part of our reality. We're not talking about parallel realities here, even multiverses. This is a topic, if you're familiar with my YouTube channel, that I've talked a lot about in the past. And I encourage you to look at some of these links, like this playlist here, of lectures I've given about multiverse ideas going back to Hugh Everett III, and the more modern many interacting worlds model, another view of multiverses, parallel realities. But in the case of Ken Shoulders and dark black ball lightning, as it's referred to, Shoulders isn't referring to another reality or a parallel reality. He's referring to phenomena within our own reality here that operate at a different permittivity, one of the fundamental constants of physics, the electrical constant of free space, that determines the speed of light. And Shoulders argued that if you have objects that change permittivity that are based on exotic vacuum objects with a different state of permittivity, that's his name for static electricity, coherent structures of static electricity that he studied at a microscopic scale, since he was familiar with electronic circuitry and so forth, that these types of life forms or electronic structures or whatever you may have don't couple with our type of matter that we're used to, ordinary matter, because their structure of space-time that they're in is simply different because they operate at a different level of permittivity. And so within our own reality, there are going to be other structures that are normally invisible to us that may pass through us, may go through solid matter because they're not operating the same frequency as we are, to kind of put it simply. And I've argued that this suggests, just following from Ken Shoulders and other researchers who look at the interaction between various states of ball lightning and dark matter, that this creates the opportunity for life forms to evolve and take advantage of these types of states where they could be invisible, they could move around, do what they do like we do, but just simply not be seen most of the time. And in my book, Dark Matter Monsters, which I encourage you to take a look at some point, I made the argument that this could be the basis for Bigfoot and other types of creatures like Bigfoot, for some of the characteristics we see around these types of encounters with Bigfoot and other creatures. So it suggests that there is another reality beyond the one that we ordinarily see that contains other types of life forms, other types of consciousness, other types of processes that work much more akin to coherent matter, correlated states of static electricity, what Shoulders initially called electron, palladium, strong electrons that come together and go apart very quickly. And as I noted in the previous video, and I've talked about at my lectures and so forth, we find there are certain characteristics around these states of coherent matter that seem to repeat over and over again, which is sort of what we're looking for in science, is a kind of consistency, repeatability, something that we can kind of get our grip on a little bit and understand some of the patterns there. And some of these characteristics, like we've talked about, is this sudden cold temperatures that you get around Bigfoot, cryptids, yes, UFOs, ghosts, haunted sites. Same sort of witness will say just suddenly got cold. I've spoken to people that have encountered this. There's sometimes a sudden silence that comes over an area. People have experienced this around ball lightning. They've certainly experienced it prior to Bigfoot encounters. In this experience I had not too long ago over at the Owl Moon Labs area earlier this year with Tobe Johnson and others coming from the Oak Ridge Bigfoot Festival, we went to an area where there had been a lot of allegedly interaction with Bigfoot. You can see this in the Flash of Beauty films, Paranormal, Bigfoot, and so forth, Bigfoot Revealed. We kind of heard that sort of silence, but I mean, people often describe this right prior to this type of encounter and in other sort of settings. You get sometimes the smell of sulfur, which we've talked about, sulfur-like compounds, which suggest some sort of nucleosynthesis going on, and often strange battery and camera failure, which I've pointed out I often experience. We've had that experience around crop circle. So what this really suggests is that there is a type of life around us that we normally wouldn't see, but sort of exists like in a pocket. And in the previous video, I called it a dark matter pocket. In other words, instead of seeing this type of matter is equally distributed around our universe the way we see other types of matter, it looks more like these dark matter models that we've seen. One of them was the Millennium Run simulation from the Max Planck Institute, where they did like a month-long simulation with a supercomputer to model dark matter, and it comes out like these stringy filaments. You've seen these pictures before. Stringy filaments that have a fractal self-similar structure. In other words, it exists sort of at mesogalactic scales. There's disagreement whether it exists at the very largest scales, if you really zoomed out of our universe, but the mesoscopic scales down to our reality. And I think you see this when you look around our reality in terms of ordinary matter, fractal-like structures, in terms of trees and biological systems that have branching structures too. There's this sort of fractal congruency between the way dark matter distributes and ordinary matter. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I started listening recently to Lisa Randall's wonderful book called Dark Matter and the Dinosaurs, where Dr. Randall, an astrophysicist, argues that what led to the extinction of the dinosaurs, the Chicxulub meteor that came in, huge meteor, very fast speeds, something the size of Manhattan, 66 million years ago. She argues, and I haven't completely finished I'm listening to it on an audiobook, haven't completely finished it yet, that was caused by an asteroid that somehow got its orbit got disturbed by going into this kind of planar of dark matter surrounding the Milky Way, and it got deflected and eventually hit us on Earth. But here's what I found really interesting right at the beginning of the book. Randall argues, to put it simply, because there's so much dark matter, this is matter that's created in the very early stages of the universe, before we have protons and neutrons and so forth, things that interact with light, subatomic structures, baryons, as they're called, that interact with electromagnetic frequencies like we're used to. You had dark matter, and ordinary matter came later, and ordinary matter is just something like, 10, 15% of dark matter. She says that all matter is there's only two types, and we're not talking about liquid, gases, and solids here for a second, but just there's dark matter, and then there's dark matter and ordinary matter together, which she argues, it's an argument that's consistent with what I've been saying here on this channel for a long time, is that you don't just have ordinary matter by itself, you have dark matter along with the light matter too. And that's why you have dark matter life forms, and yes, possibly even dark matter monsters. At least that's what we're calling them. They probably don't see themselves as monsters. But that what we consider to be ordinary matter is just a fraction of the entire spectrum. I mean, it doesn't seem that unreasonable, does it? Now, yes, is this kind of like a new way of looking at things? Well, yeah, but I mean, I think we need a new way of looking at things here, just like David Freiberger argues from Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, Department of Energy funded lab, in his paper about vortons and heavy magnetic structures that explain ball lightning, earth lights, mobile luminous objects, and so forth. You can kind of see the connection here to orbs and earth lights and ball lightning. If you haven't seen it, my previous lecture over at the SNPy 25 conference, just a few weeks ago as the recording of this video, was about ball lightning. But the idea is that they go together. And this is why you would have all of these odd phenomena that we call paranormal supernatural. Is we don't want to ignore all these witnesses who experience these phenomena. You know them, I know them, we love them, people who've experienced this personally. Either some sort of Bigfoot encounter with some strange aspect to it that many conventional Bigfoot researchers don't want to look into. People have had these sort of time loss experiences around those types of creatures, UFO encounters, ghosts, and haunted sites. We don't hear a lot from these people in our society because it's biased. There's a stigma in our Western culture against talking about these topics. Why? Well, we can talk about that another time. There's a stigma and a general avoidance of these topics because people are afraid of the ostracism and the ridicule, the giggle factor that they could be exposed to from neighbors, friends, colleagues, so forth, right? So this is underrepresented here, these sorts of witnesses. But, I've talked to Bigfoot witnesses. I've talked to some who said, look, Simeon, I know what you're talking about, but that wasn't my experience. It just looked like a normal, quote unquote, flesh and blood creature. Caveman, ape. There was nothing supernatural or paranormal about it. And yet I've spoken to other witnesses, several at this point, at presentations, who come up to me before or after my presentations at conferences, who say, I saw something that was extremely strange around these Bigfoot. They became transparent. They started sparkling. There was a predator-like effect, from the Predator movies, that kind of shimmering effect. So, this is why many of us think that there is a dark matter component to these types of life forms. It isn't woo, it's not strange. It's just an extension of the cosmological models that we're currently working with in science. There's ordinary life forms made of ordinary matter. I mean, we can see it in a typical way. And then there are going to be more invisible life forms that they're around us, but we're not going to see them very frequently. And if they interact with us through some sort of change, it's going to have some strange effects, which I personally feel is consistent with the witnesses I've talked to, going all the way back to Igor Burtsev, one of the first witnesses I ever met the researcher from Russia who was at this conference in Bailey, Colorado. This is sort of what started me in this direction, that talked about his people in Russia encountering entities that became invisible. Bigfoot entities. Entities that affected their car batteries. In some cases caused teleportations of objects, aports, things like that. So Igor told us he had concluded that Bigfoot was some sort of paranormal human entity. Because they have language and they can speak our language to some degree. They have their own language, we know from Ron Moorhead, the Sierra Sounds. So I think, mentioning Ron Moorhead here, this would explain why some witnesses, I've spoken to them myself, say they see Bigfoot go into a tree. I'm just telling you what they describe. They hear the sounds of the Bigfoot coming out of the tree, the howling sounds and so forth. They see the Bigfoot going in a tree. Now, I know this sounds challenges your sense of reality. It does mine too, but that's what the witnesses say they're experiencing, including a nurse I've talked to who worked with loggers who were World War II era loggers from the 40s and 50s who said the same thing. They would see the Bigfoot go into a tree and never come out again. They weren't walking behind it or anything. They, of course, didn't want to tell their bosses or anything. It would have seemed weird. That was even before they called it Bigfoot. So I think the easiest way to look at the witness encounter data, and this is data, qualitative information is a type of data too. It doesn't just have to be measurements. If we look at this qualitative data, it suggests that because our reality has a fractal structure to it, trees have a fractal structure to them, dark matter has a fractal structure, ordinary matter has a fractal structure, that this there's a sort of a fractal interaction between dark matter and ordinary matter at a very small scale where exotic vacuum objects, microball lightning exists. This isn't something we'd normally see with the naked eye, but it would suggest why we get witness encounters like we do around Bigfoot encounter, other types of cryptids, ghost sightings, haunted sightings, and therefore I call this the Bigfoot ghost complex, because it's another type of matter with its own set of interactions, and it fulfills all the criteria we look for in a scientifically treatable subject, which is you get the same repeated effects over and over again, the ones we just mentioned. The sense of space-time changing, sometimes the shift in the color spectrum where people say things turn darker. Colors look darker, and again, the temperature changes and so forth. These are thermodynamic effects that, in my view, are related to vortex cooling, something that Gerald Pollack has talked about in his Fourth State of Water presentations. You can see Gerald Pollack online. His book, The Fourth State of Water, is excellent. I would encourage you to take a look. And this sort of vortex cooling happens because the vortex has its own structure and it's literally sucking heat out of the environment to maintain its structure. And it would appear, because we get this type of cooling around these types of creatures that we call paranormal, supernatural, that there's some sort of vortex structure that they're based on. And I would suggest it's some sort of ether vortex structure related to an interaction between our matter and dark matter, or just part of dark matter, something like that. There is some sort of vortex, etheric interaction going on here, which would explain why you get this type of sudden cooling around these phenomena. Now, I've spoken to UFO witnesses that have seen the same thing. I've spoken to people that said they were in Miami in July when it was a hot night. All of a sudden, the UFO showed up, gets really cold, you feel like you need a jacket. That would suggest a real vortex type of effect going on. The vortex cooling effect. I mean, I think we have the principles already in science, the building blocks that describe this. Now, the main resistance to this, the main obstacle has just been people's willingness to listen to the witnesses. But, in my background as a sociologist, that's kind of a cardinal sin, is to ignore what the witnesses say they're perceiving. I just say we take them at their word. Sure, maybe there's some hoaxers and deceit out there occasionally, but I mean, if most people are telling us the truth about what they perceived, and a lot of these people I would imagine have to be, they're not even using their real names or anything. The reason you get these thermodynamic effects in this sort of Bigfoot ghost complex is because there's some sort of basic structures, thermodynamic structures, electromagnetic vortex, toroidal type structures that we see in coherent matter types of experiments and so forth. Take a look at Bob Greenyer and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project channel for that. So that's my thinking about it, and it suggests that there's other type of life around us. Maybe it's not something we interact with all the time, but it's around. And it would go a long ways to explain why we associate these phenomena with forests, with natural areas, with abandoned homes, right? And so forth. Because that's where you find more fractal structures. And you seem to get less of it around man-made structures. It kind of pushes more in the direction of environments with a fractal structure, with trees and so forth. So maybe the reason we get Bigfoot around forests and trees, is not just because of food supply or anything like that. It's because they're comfortable in a fractal environment. And it also might explain why they build these tree structures, which I've seen many examples of, at least in photos, and structures that people have sent me that they've seen and taken pictures of. Maybe the purpose of those structures is not to create literally a house or a structure or something to sleep in. Maybe it has an ulterior function, which is to change the fractal dimensions of the area they're in and push it towards a frequency that they're comfortable. It's some sort of waveguide or tuning mechanism to tune an area with those sort of bends and shapes that they use and so forth. It's just an idea. But this is what you're doing with scientific reasoning. You're seeing how much can you explain with a kind of a simpler theory. So my theory would be fractal vortex dynamics, interacting both with dark matter, ordinary matter, and if you have a better explanation for why we get, the cooling, the sudden quiet, the battery failure, electromagnetic disturbances, time loss, I'm open to hearing your idea too, but this is what makes sense to me. So anyway, thanks again for listening. Appreciate it. Feel free to put your comments in the box below, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care for now, and bye.